I want to talk about barriers to entry. So we've got, I've talked a little bit about this before as far as open source software and all that. The idea that a lot of this stuff was just not that easy to work with before. And even if you're developing the code and you just share it out, most of the work has been done. And so let me tell you what a script kiddie is. A script kiddie is a phrase it's kind of the hacker community. It talks about people that they don't know what they're doing. They just downloaded the script and they run it. And they have enough understanding to just kind of kick it off and target it, but they still really don't have an idea of what they're doing or the implications of what they're doing. It's like you can download an application that will send aggressive packets to a certain destination, and you can download that script and you can run it, but if you do, you're going to get in trouble. If you're stupid about it, you're going to get in trouble. So the idea of a script kiddie is someone who basically found a very strong tool that, with the help of electronics and availability of all this stuff, they have access to pretty easily. They were able to find it and they're able to execute it, but they don't quite understand everything about it. Well, I shouldn't say don't quite understand everything. I should say they understand almost nothing about it. So that becomes a theme, I guess, going forward when you start to learn just about anything. So if you've ever, and I don't know if people have, but if you've ever wandered onto an internet forum looking for assistance with some product or tool or project, you will probably have found that there is a set of etiquette to be observed in asking questions. And many of these forums in different places will have dedicated posts that say, here is how you ask questions. And the concept of that is it seems odd at first, but you're walking up to people, essentially, who know a lot more than you. You're coming to them for their knowledge. You're coming to them for their expertise. And in order to not waste their time or offend them, you need to ask correctly. You need to use your words properly. And you need to, frankly, use a proper tone. Tone is something that's far beyond the scope of this vlag, but tone is extremely important. And it can be hard for non-native speakers to be able to communicate and keep tone in mind. So if you're a non-native speaker, it's worth bringing that up. And you might have seen some of these questions that get posted on forums and just get ignored just entirely, and then other questions get 80 responses to it. So there is some, I want to say magic because I'm following this theme a little bit. There is some magic to how you ask the question, the order in which you place the words in your post that you're writing, in the question that you're asking. I find that very interesting, especially in programming, because in programming you're essentially collecting a set of symbols and you're putting them in the right order. And in one special order, it will do one thing, and in another special order, it will do another thing. Your task is merely to figure out the logic and determine what that special order is. Work backwards from there. But aside from that, you're trying to observe their rules. You come in respectfully to people. You can kind of look at this. You're going to the elders of the tribe, essentially, and saying, "Oh, great and wise elders," to take this on a Native American kick, like, how do I hunt, lol? That if that's your question, they're gonna scoff at you. They're gonna leave you alone, and they might attack. They might hit you with something. But that's essentially what people do on the internet when they wander into other people's I don't want to say houses, but other people's clubs, I guess, and say, hey, can you accommodate me? You know, I see this happen on like even like live streams. The live stream has its own community. It has its own conversation. It has its own tone. It has its own communication style, and it has its own memes, which I find intensely interesting. And those all can be learned and absorbed by doing nothing more than shutting up. Simply being quiet and listening will clue you in on how these people work. It'll give you some instruction as to how they communicate and what the best way to communicate with them is. All you have to do is shut up. But some people can't do that. So they wind up, wandering. You're essentially wandering into someone else's house. Yeah, you kick in the door to someone else's house. You wander in, you sit down at their table, and you start eating some of their food. And you say, hey, I bought something a while ago from the guy that used to live at this house, and it's broken. Can you help me fix it? And it's like, who are you? I don't know what you're talking about. Who's the guy? What's the tool? I didn't even live here at that point. And also, get out. You know, there are that's essentially what you do when you wander into some of these places and ask the wrong way. You use the wrong words. So what I find, so that's kind of a little bit tangential to what I wanted to talk about, was the idea of the script kiddies. So we've established that people don't have this understanding and maybe necessarily don't know how to ask the questions. But the point is, it's easy to learn. All you have to do is shut up. All you have to do is listen. All you have to do is pay attention. And if you do that, you can become, an acolyte, a novice, a low-level person in that community and get information out of them. So, I say this because a couple of things. Recently, I communicated with someone regarding a bug on GitHub, and it was an old bug, and you don't want to necro a thread, you don't want to bring out an old thing back to life, but I thought I had some value to add, and also I found a problem in one of the comments, and that should have been corrected. So I would have been afraid previously to, publicly go out on GitHub to maintainers of very large projects and say, what did I say? How do I hunt, lol? Like the most absolute basic question. Those are not the people to ask. And if you do ask them, you might find yourself permanently banned or something like that, or permanently ignored. It's better to keep your mouth shut and appear a fool than to open your mouth and relieve all doubt. Or alleviate all doubt? I don't know. Like, if your mouth is shut, people might think that you're a fool. But if you open your mouth, then people will know for certain that you are a fool. And again, just shutting up will get you so far. But there was an etiquette that had to be observed, and you had to figure out what that etiquette was. And sometimes you could literally read in instructions in all caps at the top of the forum, here's the etiquette, here's how you ask questions. If you don't ask questions, we might just delete your thread entirely if you don't ask it the right way. So I made that comment on GitHub, and there's a lot of tone to be managed in there, but I realized that, years ago I would have been afraid to have made this afraid. I don't know why I turned into Christopher Walken there a little bit. I would have been afraid to do to publicly, alleviate all doubt that I was a fool. But now I understand enough that I can not only ask the question, but be of use to other people and not annoy the elders of the tribe while doing so. So it's funny how that becomes, I'm not sure if I'm talking about this or if I'm talking around this. It always was confusing to me that I could have I've talked about this before, but like when I got into Linux, the man pages were unreadable to me. And because I had no idea what I was reading. And it took a lot of knowledge to get to the point where I could actually read the man page. And what was so crazy to me was that I remember very vividly sitting there reading the words and saying, what did I just read? I don't know these words. I don't know the words in this context. I don't even know what they're talking about. Like, it's another language, essentially. And it takes time to learn that language, to be able to know what it is that you're reading. And I find it very interesting that I can provide you with information, or that you can be provided with information. Someone can provide me with information and say, here's all you need to know. And you can open it up and, it looks like moon runes. It means nothing to you. And you have to learn, and you have to understand, and you have to extend your knowledge and extend yourself to get to the point that you can actually read it. It's very interesting. Because we like to think that this, I know that knowledge is power, and I've talked about that a lot. But the idea that knowledge is obfuscated or hidden, basically in plain sight, I guess. I don't know. And part of the reason for this is, first of all, like, I want to know about this because I find it interesting in that recent example of commenting on GitHub in a useful manner that gets the elders to, I feel that. Yeah, I feel that. Woo, nailed that. Watch out back there. That was good. Very icy. That was some nice downshifting action. Downshifted all the way to first gear to make that stop. Where was I? Yeah, that this knowledge can be presented to you, can be handed to you, and that you almost literally can't read it. So, to be able to ask the question and then receive basically an answer and an approval from the wizards of the tribe, from the elders of the tribe, is pretty neat. I'm reminded, I was kind of introduced to this idea, or I was reminded of this recently when I started reading Howl's Moving Castle, which I have a love for Miyazaki animation and films, and Howl's Moving Castle was one that was done recently, and I've introduced it to my kids and they really enjoy it. And there's a lot of unsaid or unspoken stuff in there, and kind of implied. And I wanted to know a little bit more about the world, or what was firmly adapted and what was actually canon. So I decided to read the book, and I did part reading, part audiobook, I guess. But it was very interesting, and it's interesting. It definitely kept my interest. I liked it. The action was not terrible, which is nice, but the world was interesting and the characters were interesting. The whole thing was quite interesting, and I don't know if that's just because I'm a fan of the movie and I wanted to know the details, but a lot was adapted into the movie, and the original, the book is quite good. But there was part of it. It's also filed under young adult, which I think means like there's no curse words and there's no fornication in it. So it's like good. Like, well, if no one gets horribly murdered in detail, or has extramarital relations and says F words, then it must be for children. Though there's a bit in there about magic spells, and it's the idea is that these spells are in paper, and in this world that they're building, Howl is trying to teach the younger magician how to set up some of these spells, and he said the more complicated spells always have an error or a have a mistake or a gotcha built into them, and you have to identify those, possibly multiple mistakes, and figure them out before you perform before you do the spell. Otherwise, bad things happen. So the idea that you would prepare this product because it's essentially written words. Oh yeah, it said that the spell might be presented in riddle form. So it's like, you have to be, you have to be this tall to ride. You have to be this smart to figure out this powerful spell. The alternative would be to just put all the details. Here's exactly how you do it, line by line, step by step. And then pretty much anyone could do the spell. But the idea is that the people who created the spell or wrote the spell knew that if it was that powerful, then the people who were reading it should know that, there's a mistake here. Like, this is clearly implying that you should do this, but it doesn't mention it explicitly. The idea that it has bugs, essentially. And that's what brings me around, that as a protector of knowledge, I guess. It still has to be somewhat common knowledge that, there are bugs and you can't just go, just run out the gate with it. But if that is shared, then you have the opportunity to present, this is what I talked about before, you present like 80% code. 80%, partially, mostly constructed code that has errors, has bugs, or has, weird environmental features that you rely on either for your system or intentionally in order to obfuscate or confuse people. The idea that you publish the code and say, here's the code, here it is working. And then, like, in this example, I suppose, you would purchase you would download the code and you would run it and it would give you problems. And you would go, well, that's weird. And you would look up the problems, first you Google it, and then you don't find anything, or you find like one mention of it, and you basically find that it's not a problem. And then you go to the website of the code and everyone's like, oh yeah, great, thanks for the code, works great. And then you have to ask yourself some questions like, is it just me? Am I the only one? And the answer might be that you need to go down a rabbit hole of, what is the error? What does the error mean? What does the error imply? How do I look at this code and see if that lines up with what this error implies? You still need to be able to read the code. Again, it's 80% lower in the firearm realm. You're creating something that is basically all the heavy lifting is done, but there's a few gotchas in there. So what you're presenting to people is not, hit the ground running and just go. What you're presenting them with is a slight puzzle. You're presenting them with problems that, if they want it bad enough, they will be able to figure them out. And that was what I was talking about with the open source code. I'll probably have to revisit my vlog on that, where I was talking about open source and the problems I have with it. But the point is, there shouldn't be script kiddies. It's not knowledge that is, what is it? This is actually a Jordan Peterson-ism, so take it with a grain of salt. Beware of unearned knowledge. It's something that you were presented with, but you didn't earn it. You don't necessarily understand it. So that seems to be something that does transcend his nonsense. But the idea that still the idea that I give you 80% of what you need, and all you got to do is that last 20%, or even that last 10%, or to provide something intentionally with bugs that you need to be somewhat knowledgeable, or at least have, a minor skill level. See, that's the thing. If the bugs were minor, then anyone would be able to walk into the code and fix them. But the question is, will they? If the problem is simple and the error message is simple, or the warnings are simple, then it's like, oh, I did this in another, I'll have to watch that vlog again. I don't know what I know. Yeah, I don't know all that I know, I guess. I did something and it was very easy, and I was like, well, hang on. How much experience am I actually applying to this problem? Maybe it would have been basically impossible for me many years ago. So it's an interesting idea. The idea that you can present knowledge to people, and there's still a barrier to entry. You know, you're sharing the knowledge, but you're not handing them a prepackaged solution. You know, it's not a pop top lid. You got to figure out how to get in there. I got to think more about this, but this may be my solution to open sourcing some of these items, because I frankly don't like the idea of open sourcing stuff directly, but open sourcing older code and stuff that I'm not printing currently, I don't really have much of a problem with it, aside from the open source script kiddie idea of it, where you just download it and I'll just run it. Because sometimes if you present source files in working condition, you're going to have, you know, people that just run with it. I'll have to revisit some of those other flags and see what I was thinking about it at the time, see if I can reconcile that with this new bit of information. So if I suddenly start open sourcing stuff, don't expect it to be easy. I have open sourced some things, so I'm still trying to do more. Yeah, I'll come back around to this.